Okay, then I will admit everybody. Hi, everybody who's rolling in right now. We're just about to get started once everybody is admitted. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the 2024 Community Legislative Session update. We hope that this session will be really informative for everybody and that you'll all be leaving feeling inspired to help animals. We're really fortunate tonight that we have 5 organizations who are doing really great advocacy work for animals presenting tonight. So you really have a great roundtable of experts here that you can hopefully get a lot of information from and a lot of ways to take action for animals in your own way. So going into just the basics for the meeting, just so everybody knows, this event is being recorded. Our idea here is that we want to record the meeting so that we can share it with other supporters who aren't able to attend tonight, as well as allow you all to be able to refer back to the recording if you had any outstanding questions. So the video, microphone, and chat functions are turned off for participants. The only reason for this is just to keep us really on task. We have a lot of content to get through tonight with multiple speakers. We just want to make sure that we're able to pack in as much information as possible. That being said, we do have a Q&A feature, and we highly encourage everybody that has questions to use that function. It's going to be at the top of your screen, and it says Q&A and has a little question bubble. So you're welcome to use that if you have any questions about a specific bill or a specific way to take action. Maddie, who is our educational events manager, will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. And if there is a very specific question related to a bill or something like that, she'll flag that for a speaker, but most likely all of the questions will be held to the end, so we can have some more formal time to answer all of the questions that you have. As you are asking questions, please try to keep them respectful and on topic. That way we can really maximize the time for everybody here. And then, of course, we hope that you leave feeling inspired to help animals. So going into the speakers that we have tonight, as I mentioned, we have a really great roundtable of speakers. I will be one of the speakers tonight. My name is Brenna Anders. I'm the Director of Education and Advocacy for Pasado Safe Haven. For those of you who don't know, Pasado Safe Haven is a Washington-based nonprofit dedicated to ending animal cruelty. And we do that by helping animals who are in immediate need and need some help and rehabilitation. And then we also work to alleviate the root causes of animal cruelty through things like education and advocacy. And I'm going to pass it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Brenna. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Thompson-Garner. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Mission Advancement at the Northwest Animal Rights Network. And for those who don't know, the Northwest Animal Rights Network is also based in Washington. We operate across the Pacific Northwest, so you can find us in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, and hopefully soon in Idaho. And we try to end the exploitation of all sentient beings, and that includes both non-human animals and humans. So we kind of work at the nexus of exploitation for all. And I'll pass it along to Dan.
All right, thanks so much, Hannah. And Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Paul. I'm the Washington State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, and I'm based here in Seattle. But Humane Society of the United States, we're a national organization. We were formed in the 50s to take on large-scale systemic animal cruelty and animal exploitation that was sort of beyond the scope and scale of what a local animal shelter at the time could do. And so we take on the big fights. And not sure who else is, if Josh or Claire is here. I'm going to pass to Josh, but I'm not sure if Josh is on. Is he on, Brenna?
I see them, but I think that they accidentally got into the attendee version instead of the presenter version.
Okay, let me see if I can find them and turn on their microphone. Let's see. Huh? Oh my gosh, people keep being added to to the attendance every time I try and click on them. They move. All right. So Josh was just added as a presenter.
Should I go, Brenna? Sorry about that. I don't know how I got into that. Teams always is not.
No, that's okay. It was probably something we did on our end.
Teams always screws up for me, so sorry about that. Okay, sorry. So yeah, really quick. My name is Josh Diamond. As was stated, I'm the operations manager for the local small grassroots organization, Animal Rights Initiative. We formed a little over 6 years ago. I joined about a year and a half into the existence. And so we focus on legislative advocacy, obviously, is why we're here, as well as we do street protests and other forms of demonstration and pressure, specifically pressure campaigns for things such as trying to get restaurants out here to stop selling foie gras, try to get we've done campaigns along with others to try to get Petco to end its pet trade. Louis Vuitton is a target we've worked on. Starbucks to drop their upcharge. So anyhow, yeah, we do that combination of pressure campaigning and legislative advocacy for animal liberation. I'll pass it to Claire.
Thanks, Josh. Nice to be unmuted. Hi, everybody. I'm Claire Lobes Davis, and I'm the president of Washington Wildlife First. We are a very small, fairly new organization. We've just been around for 2 years. That is dedicated to advocating for fish and wildlife in Washington State, and specifically reforming the state system of managing fish and wildlife from the old system that's existed for decades, focused around consumption of wildlife, to a new model that is focused on conservation rather than consumption. Nice to be here.
Thank you, everybody. All right, so we're going to jump into doing an overview of the Washington State Legislature. So in Washington State, we have a specific legislative process that we operate under. Each state has their own way of working on legislation. And in Washington, we operate on a biennium. That means that our legislation goes over 2 years, that is comprised of 2 sessions. The first session being 90 days, we call that the long session. And then we have a 60-day session that follows, which is what we call the short session. So that's the session in right now. We're in the short session. once in a while, there are special sessions that are held in extreme cases. Maybe there's an emergency that has happened that requires immediate response from the legislature, but that again is in very rare extreme cases. So our legislature is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives currently has 98 members, and they serve 2-year terms, and the Senate has 49 senators, and they serve 4-year terms. In both the House of Representatives and the Senate, the legislators that are assigned to either of those chambers are assigned to specific policy committees based off of their interests and expertise. And those policy committees are what bills are assigned to based off of what the bill is related to. If we go to the next slide, we're going to be talking about the lifespan of the bill or the overall legislative process for bills. So there's a lot of steps a bill needs to go through in order to become law, starting with the initial drafting, assigning a sponsor, and getting the bill introduced. That bill is then assigned to a policy committee like what I just discussed, and we'll go through a hearing process, a voting process, and then if it does make it out of that policy committee, it will be moved to what's called the Rules Committee, or it will move to a fiscal committee if there is a budget item on the bill. The Rules Committee is basically like a quality control process that is used before a bill is officially moved to the chamber floor. So it would move to either the Senate floor or the House floor for a final vote. And then at that point, it actually moves over to the opposite chamber and goes through that entire process all over again. So it has to make it through both the House and the Senate before it can officially go to the governor's desk to be signed into law. So just again, starting with like the nuts and bolts of how a bill becomes a law. House bills, you'll typically see abbreviated to HB, and those are bills that start in the House of Representatives and then eventually move to the Senate. And Senate bills are abbreviated as SB, and they will start in the Senate and then have to move over to the House of Representatives. Then there's the session cutoff calendar that a bill has to also make it through. So in addition to having to follow the legislative process, there is also a series of cutoffs that a bill has to make it through in order to continue throughout a legislative session. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a short session that we are working through right now. So our cutoff this session come very, very quickly. Just this last week, we had the Chamber of Origin cutoff, and next week we are coming up on February 21st, which is the next policy committee cutoff. So any of the bills that are still working through the legislative process right now, if they don't make it past this February 21st cutoff, they will no longer proceed this session. So essentially, going to the next slide for you visual people out there, this basically creates a funnel. So bills are introduced, they are funneled into the legislative process and the cutoff calendar, and then some bills come out at the very end and are passed into law. So we get hundreds of bills that are introduced every single year, and only a fraction of them actually end up becoming law in the end. And that's just part of our legislative process and the ability for legislators to make informed decisions around the policies that are passed into law here in Washington. So now that we've kind of gone through a bit of the legislative process, we are going to start talking about the policies that we're working on this legislative session. So I will be sharing some on behalf of Pasado's, and then the other panelists here will be sharing some other really important bills that are working through the process this session. So the one I'm going to be talking about first is House Bill 1961, which would make animal cruelty in the first degree a ranked felony in Washington state. So currently, animal cruelty in the first degree is already a Class C felony, and that's because people recognize the severity of this type of crime. Animal cruelty in the first degree became a Class C felony in 1994 with the passage of Pasado's law. So this is a really important legacy bill for us on the Pasado's team. So Pasado the donkey was unfortunately brutally killed in a park here in Washington in 1992, which made people realize that our animal cruelty laws had not been updated in a long time. And now we are here to further codify the significance of what animal cruelty in the first degree is by adding it to the sentencing guidelines grid for Washington state. And by adding it to the sentencing guidelines grid at a level 3 is what we are suggesting. We will create a clear framework for judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys to work from when they are processing these types of crimes. It also will create clear guidance for defendants who commit these types of crimes as well. So this bill actually just had a hearing in its second policy committee today and has been scheduled for an executive session this coming week. And we are hopeful to see it pass from the Senate Law and Justice Committee and move on to the Senate Rules Committee. The next bill that I'm going to talk about is House Bill 1012. And this is improving the response to extreme weather events in Washington. So the reason why this bill was originally introduced is we have had a lot more extreme weather events with climate change being a big threat here in Washington. In 2021, there was a severe heat wave that within 1 week, about 100 Washingtonians unfortunately lost their lives due to heat-related illness, and an undocumented number of pets and other animals lost their lives as well due to heat-related illness. So what this bill does is it creates a grant program so that small communities and federally recognized tribes can get reimbursed for providing pet-friendly shelters and housing, as well as pet-inclusive transportation during extreme weather events. And this is really important because a lot of people refuse services during emergencies because they want to make sure that their pets and their families can stay together. So that's really something that this bill addresses, is it allows people to stay with their families, stay with their pets when emergencies happen. And I am going to pass it over to Josh, who is going to be talking about the octopus farming bill.
Awesome. Thanks, Brenna. So yeah, the octopus farming bill, this is a fairly straightforward piece of legislation, HB 1153. It was introduced last session in 2023 by Representative Strom Peterson. And it's first of its kind in globally legislation in terms of it being introduced in any legislative body. I do not want to take any sort of credit that I was like the first person to think of legislatively introducing this, but in terms of it actually passing a body of any sort of governmental entity, this was the first time just at the end of January, or when was this? Now we're forgetting as it goes so quickly. Early this month, I guess, this passed the House, I should say, early this month. This bill, after passing the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee last year, and then stalling in the Rules Committee. I don't know how much I need to get into this. Brenna did a good job covering this, but in this biennium, so like an odd to the even year, if you have bills that have advanced and they can into the next committee and they stall, they can be taken up in the even numbered year, such as this year. So that is what happened with HB 1153. And so what it means is if it did not pass through the legislature to the governor's desk this year, it would have to go back to step 0, basically. So that was maybe a little more than I wanted to explain. It's very boring, but nonetheless, here we are. And just like I said a little while ago, earlier this month, this bill passed the House 70-27, so had wide bipartisan support. And yeah, like I said, it would ban preemptively octopus farming in our state, whether land-based or aquatic-based systems. Some of you may or may not know this is a burgeoning global industry. There is a planned farm by a massive multinational company out of Spain. There's a farm planned in the Canary Islands. There's research ongoing across the world from US, Mexico, China, Australia, Spain, like I mentioned, Portugal. So it's really getting off the ground. It's a luxury product that sadly there's been an increasing demand amongst rich world consumers for octopus meat. And so there are multinational corporations and the like, quote unquote, seafood corporations who are trying to cash in on this by saying, hey, we're overfishing the oceans for octopuses. We need to cram them into large factory farms to serve the demand. But all of us here know that's unnecessary. Washington's been doing just fine without octopus farms, it would seem. And so we just wanted to preemptively get ahead of this. And so, like I said, Representative Strom Peterson jumped on this last year, very gracious of him. And we had a committee. One last thing, we had a committee hearing after it passed the House, moved to the Senate Agriculture, Water, Natural Resources, and Parks Committee. Just yesterday had a hearing, all in supportive of in terms of testifiers, and we have an executive session, a vote scheduled. When is that? Yeah, Monday afternoon, the 19th. So yeah, we're got a lot of momentum, and we're hoping the committee will pass this out to the Senate Rules Committee, and I'll pass it to the next person. Brandon knows who that is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's me.
Okay.
All right. So, hey, thanks, Josh. That's super exciting. Really, it'd be amazing to be the first state in the country to do this. So I'm going to talk a bit about it's now engrossed substitute House Bill 1097, but this is a bill that will basically stop the sale of any new cosmetic product that's been tested on animals going forward. So this is a great bill. This really shows the process in which you may get stymied on a year or two, even in a bill that has broad support, but you sort of keep working it and keep at it, keep after it. This bill has been in the legislature for the last several years. It made it through its committee last year in the House, the Business Committee, and it ultimately stalled out in rules. So it had support, but it didn't ever get a floor vote. So because it's a biennium, as Brenna mentioned, it kind of came back in its last form. So it made it through the committee. It was pulled to the floor earlier, I think in January 25th, I believe, and it passed out 90-3. So massive support. We knew that was the case. I think it was a bill that last year just caught up with being a victim of just too many bills out there. But what this bill does, and so I mentioned it bans any new products, and so cosmetics don't have to be tested on animals in this country. It's not like a medication, so it's voluntary by companies, right? And we know that cosmetic testing on animals is very inefficient. Humans don't respond the same as animals to these tests. They're not good indicators of safety. It's a lot more accurate and more cost effective to do some of the computer modeling and human cell stuff that they're doing. So that has spurred sort of a national discussion that we've been having with the Personal Care Products Council, which is the industry trade group. About 90% of all cosmetics companies in the United States are part of this trade group. And so we've worked with them to craft federal legislation that essentially would do exactly what this Washington bill does. And so we mirrored this legislation. 11 other states have now passed this, Oregon just last year. So we are trying to move the needle forward because federal legislation just takes so dang long that there's animal suffering in the meantime. So really exciting to see. We had a hearing today. So again, it passed the House 90-3. The Senate had its hearing today. I think it went very, very well. Support across the board. It's also been scheduled for an executive session out of committee next Tuesday. So hopefully it's going to continue on its journey and make it to the floor and have equal success in the Senate side. So please reach out to your senators, express your support, because it's a very, very good bill, and widely supported by industry and animal advocates and the general public. Great, thanks. Oh, Claire, I think you're on mute, if it's you.
There we go. Sorry about that. You can just assume that what I just said was absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Tan. That's really exciting to hear about. Cosmetics testing on animals was one of the first issues I really got involved in high school, which possibly dates me. And it's fantastic to see such real progress on the issue finally. So, you know, the bad news this year for wildlife was that we started the session with a lot of, you know, very aggressive bills sponsored or encouraged by hunting groups and ranching groups that were very aggressive and, you know, had incorporated some really bad policies for wildlife. So, you know, we were kind of fending them off with both hands. But the great news is that most of them have now died. And we're only looking at 2 more that are still advancing. So, you know, the one bill that we were excited about advancing, Hannah's going to talk about later, and I'm mostly going to talk about the ones that we're worried about. The first one is HB 2424, which in its original form was terrible. It would have required the state to align its wolf management policy with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. And although it was not made apparent in the bill or anywhere else, and most of the people on various committees obviously did not know this, the Colville tribe allows year-round hunting of wolves with no daily or seasonal limits. And they also have a 4-month trapping season for wolves. Together with the Spokane tribe, which also allows wolf hunting, tribal hunting over the past 2 years has killed 33 wolves and is the largest source by far of wolf mortality in the state. So, you know, this bill was really, to start with, a sneaky way to introduce the idea of wolf hunting and to move toward general wolf hunting in Washington without ever saying those words. Because all that it said, and it seemed very, very harmless, was that the state should align its policies with the management approach of the Colville tribes, never mentioning wolf hunting at all. What we succeeded, thanks to, you know, some help of other people on this call and even the advocacy from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, succeeded in amending the bill in the House to change align to coordinate, which was a huge win and eliminated the specter that the state was going to be expected to actually align its management policy with the Colville tribes. The bill still isn't good, however, because it contains a lot of leftover language from the original bill talking about how much more successful the Colville management approach is than the state management approach. Whereas, you know, when all we really know about the Colville management approach, because we don't have, you know, open records that we can look at it, is that they hunt wolves. So it essentially still has kind of some dead language in the findings talking about how fantastic the Colville approach is, how fantastic, in other words, you know, it is to hunt wolves with a goal that the Colville have of killing 24% of the wolves on their land each year. So we're working now. It's passed from the House. We had a hearing on it this week, and it's headed for an executive session in front of the Senate Agriculture Committee on the 19th. And what we're working toward now is to just delete that language, which doesn't really have a legal effect, but it's just dangerous to have hanging around the state code, and just have it be a fairly harmless instruction for the state to work more closely, communicate better, and coordinate with the tribes. The next bill that we've been watching and worried about is HB 2293, which is a bill to fund a work group to study the impact of avian predation on salmon. Again, this is a bill that in its original form was terrible. It was very obvious from the original language that the goal was to find new ways to kill birds because they are eating salmon that we want to eat. As amended in the House, it's been softened quite a bit. New members have been added to the work group, so it's looking a little bit better. And the language that was really focused on lethal control measures has been softened a whole lot. We are still hoping to amend it more in the Senate, because even if they're not instructed to come up with lethal control methods, we're certainly concerned that that is the first impulse of the members, many of the members of this work group who come from state and federal agencies. For example, the Army Corps over the past several years, you might have seen the story in the Seattle Times about this, has killed more than 5,000 cormorants at a location on the Columbia River for eating salmon. That cormorants then moved to a worse location on a bridge where they're destroying the bridge, obstructing traffic, and eating even more salmon. And now the story is that Oregon is looking at paying something like $18 million over the next 4 years to try to reverse what the Army Corps did and persuade the cormorants to move back to the place they originally were, because killing them just made the situation worse. And that is often the case, and it really doesn't solve the underlying problem, because as usual, the underlying problem is people. We've built structures that are perfect environments for big bird colonies that are near fish, and we've also built structures that impede fish passage, introduced a whole bunch of fish into the system at one time from hatcheries, and created really a nice buffet for the large colonies of birds that we're hosting nearby. And until we fix that, we're not going to solve the problem by killing more birds. So we are working now in the Senate to amend the bill further to get some more members on the work group to make sure that the work group looks at best available science, that it examines the possible unintended consequences of the actions it recommends, and most importantly, that it focuses on non-lethal deterrence and mitigation approaches rather than having a knee-jerk reaction to go to lethal control. I think we're done with that one. All right, and just quickly, and these are some of the bills, there are actually a fair number of them that we were worried about earlier, which I can happily say are dead this session. Start with SB 5939, another terrible wolf bill that seemed to be proposed almost innocently. I think the sponsor really thought it was a great idea that would be great for wolves, great for ranchers. I think he expected everyone to cheer and be excited about this. But the bill would have allowed livestock owners to kill the first wolf returning to a predation site without, presumably without even waiting to see if wolves were even responsible for killing the livestock in the first place. And then leaving the dead livestock killed by whatever means out as bait and essentially hunting wolves over bait. With no evidence whatsoever that the first wolf that might happen across the dead cow was responsible in some way for killing the cow. So it was really, we called it the wolf baiting bill because it basically would legalize wolf baiting, and it was awful. And it seemed, I think, in the testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee, which again Hannah and Dan were involved in this effort, I think that the committee realized that it's really an awful bill and was not going to be popular, and it stalled out in the committee without a vote. The next one, another wolf bill. Most of these come from the familiar sources in Northeast Washington. HB 2423 is kind of a revival of a bill that did not make progress last session to create a regional wolf management plan in the Northeast area to kind of break that area off of the rest of the state, which is subject to a wolf recovery plan because wolves are still a state endangered species, and to have different rules to govern wolves in Northeast Washington, where most of the wolves in the state live and where the livestock owners are particularly agitated about most of the wolves in the state. living there. They would love to have wolves declared recovered in that area before they've recovered in the state, so that the state can kill them more freely, livestock owners can kill them more freely, and we can get to the point where we can have a wolf hunt like the Colville tribe does. So this bill would have been a step in that direction by kind of creating a separate plan and a separate entity of the state in the northeast that would no longer adhere to the wolf recovery plan. That bill never seemed to get a whole lot of traction, and it also stalled in the Senate Agriculture Committee without a vote. Finally, and this is maybe the one that had the most remote chances of passing, but the one that we're most worried about is Senate Joint Resolution 8208. A joint resolution like this is a little bit different from the process that Brenna explained at the start, because it is proposing a constitutional amendment. So to pass, it would have to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate, a 2/3 vote in the House, and then it would go on the ballot for all of us to vote on, and it would need to be approved by popular vote. It wouldn't go to the governor's desk. So there's a long, hard road for a constitutional amendment, but this amendment was so bad that we kind of pulled out all the stops opposing it, because even though we didn't expect it to pass. In short, it's a bill that the NRA has been running across the country, but it's kind of the most extreme form of the NRA's bill that would create a constitutional right, equal to the right to speak, assemble, practice religion, to hunt, fish, and trap using traditional methods, which is code for cruel methods of trapping and inefficient and ecologically damaging methods of hunting and fishing, and would have elevated this right to a constitutional right. And by doing that, it basically would have prevented us going forward forever until the end of time, presumably changing wildlife policy effectively to limit hunting, eliminate cruel trapping, which I hope we're headed there sometime soon, and would have eliminated our ability entirely to use ballot initiatives to change state wildlife policy, because they would be overridden by the constitutional amendment. So we, Hannah and Dan were instrumental here, but we generated hundreds of letters that went into the full Senate, telling what a terrible idea this was. And today we got the official news. We knew that it had stalled out on the Senate Rules Committee earlier, but today we got the official news that it has been relegated to the Rules Committee X pile in the Senate, which means that they've basically thrown it in the trash this session. It's not going anywhere.
All right, thank you, Claire. Oh, there's an echo. Can anybody else hear that? There's no echo anymore, so I'm just going to keep going. All right, so I am the bearer of bad news. I'm so sorry, but please bear with me as I go over the two first bills that have died that we so tragically did not want to see die. And then Dan will take over for me for the following two bills. So SB 6221, requiring transparency for the UW Primate Research Center, died in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. This is very unfortunate because it targeted the Washington National Primate Research Center, which is located at the UW campus in Seattle. It's underground, so you can't actually see the Primate Research Center if you go to the campus. So just know that all of these primates are actually hidden underground, because the UW really doesn't want us to see what's going on. And so what this bill would have helped with is for us to see what's going on. It would have given us a peek into what goes on more at this lab. It would have required the UW to list very important things that the taxpayer who funds this lab need to know if they're monitoring these types of things. And so that would have been things like how many animals the lab is using, how many animals have died in the experiments that people use to experiment on these animals. So very, very useful bill. Unfortunately, it did not pass. But the fight against the Washington National Primate Research Center is not over. This was not, the be-all, end-all to get to this center. There's still actionable items that you can do, and I will post those in the chat. to go very quickly, there are certain ways that you can try to pressure the Permanent Research Center into changing and becoming more transparent aside from the legislature. And that's called the IACUC, and that's the Institutional Care and Use Committee, which actually is the committee that oversees the well-being of these animals. That's part of their job. And there are ways to get involved in that process, and I'll put that in the chat. On to the next one. SB 5846, this is kind of the bill that Claire alluded to, a wildlife bill. It's the Beaver Management Plan. And what this bill would have done is it would have required the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to implement a statewide beaver ecosystem management plan. So this plan would have protected beavers and ecosystems. So it would have been good for beavers and good for ecosystems as a whole. Some other things that it would have done, it would have protected beavers by, hopefully reducing beaver mortality rates in designated habitats, and would have helped with beaver conflicts. So a lot of conflict between beavers and landowners happen when beavers do what beavers do and chew on trees and make dams. They sometimes flood property, and that can get annoying to property owners. And so this would have helped mitigate those conflicts. This is not to say that the legislature is the be all end all for this action either. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife has its own mechanism for creating laws within the department, and those are called, that process is called rulemaking. And the public can also get involved in rulemaking. They don't have to wait for the legislature to get involved with Department of Fish and Wildlife rulemakings. And I'll post that in the chat too, so you can see how to get involved there. And I'll pass it on to Dan.
All right, thanks, Hannah, so much. Okay, yeah, so this is the sad slide for sure. This is a bummer. And I'm heartened because the bills that are moving are fantastic and it's great, and we really do have some stuff to push across the finish line this session. The next two bills, these are really our Humane Society's priority bills for this session, so it's really sad to see them on here. But I'm also heartened because there is, this is a long process, right? We're seeing with the cosmetics bill that died last year, but it's going to make its way through this year. So I'm going to do a little bit of a sidetrack here to talk about committee makeups, because I think it's important in this discussion on these next two bills. So, legislators get assigned to different committees based on their expertise or preference. And so, a lot of the animal-friendly legislators may live in urban or suburban areas, and they're just not really trying to get onto the agriculture or natural resources committees, right? So those committees are typically populated by legislators that are in more rural districts, maybe have more, consumptive use of animals in their district. And so they're just really hard committees in general for us to operate in. So the next two bills are dealing with committees that should be typically more friendly to our issues, right? So very exciting about these bills. The first one, 6064, is a bill that's dealing with animals in sort of a roundabout way, right? That we know that our state is so quickly growing that the Puget Sound region, for example, is going to double in size in the next 20 years, which is crazy. And housing is a major topic of discussion in our legislature. It's kind of the issue of our times, really, right? And access to housing, equity to housing is all critically important. And these are really large discussions that have been happening over the past few years. So, we want to also recognize that keeping people and their pets together is critically important for animal welfare in the state, right? It's really important for our shelters to not be overcrowded. And it's really important to sort of recognize that as an issue that we need to address as a state. The problem is that there has been really there's lacking tenant rights in our state. And so there's a lot of groups that have been working for several years about equity and access that are sort of a little bit ahead in the line, if you so to speak, right? And so, our bill got introduced, but this committee that we're working in, this housing committee, is the first time I've actually worked in this committee. So you're really creating relationships with new legislators that haven't really seen your issues. They haven't really considered animal issues beyond what comes to the floor. And so I think we made a lot of progress on this bill, despite it not progressing, right? And what the bill does, it essentially looks at pet deposits and pet rent. These are two huge barriers for folks trying to find affordable housing in our state. And right now, landlords can charge pet deposits, which are essentially like security deposits, but there's no recourse for the renter to get the money back, right? There's really no standards. There's no obligation to pay it back. So it really serves as essentially a slush fund for landlords, right? That's it's good because it incentivizes landlords to allow pets in their buildings, but they don't have to. But also, it's just basically taking money. And so that's the first thing we want to address, because right now it's just it's not fair. And then the second is, beyond the pet deposit, then landlords are also charging monthly rental fees too. Both are just become impossible for renters. So the bill itself would limit deposits to $150, and it would give a whole set of rules to get that returned, and then it would actually prohibit all rent as well. So the hearing went well, but I did not realize, even in very liberal legislators, many that are on the housing committee are actually landlords themselves. So the audience fell a little bit on deaf ears, or there's a little more resistance, right? So we have some work to do, some education to do, but all is not lost on 6064. There is a bill that has been worked for renter rights, that it's House Bill 2114, and in it, part of that very, very large, expansive bill, there is a deposit cap where any deposit, any fee, any deposit from when you move into an apartment or a condo, a renter, can't exceed 1 month's total rent, and that would include pet rent, with security deposit and with everything else. So we do feel like there's a way to at least capture part of this legislation, but we'll continue to work it. We're even trying to amend the pet rent onto this 2114 as well. So stay tuned on this one. It's definitely something we'll be bringing back next year. We've been working with the ASPCA and Seattle Humane on this one. There is a lot of support on the general body, but again, you're sort of gatekept on the committee level by just the 9 legislators on that committee, right? So you have to sort of get through that first wave to get to the larger floor. But we know there's support. We know housing is a right, and housing is really important in our state. So that's that one. Thank you for bearing with me there. The second bill is also extremely important to us too, on fur sales. And so we've been looking at the fur industry in Washington State for many years now. We've tried to tackle industrial fur farming in our state, right? Which is essentially these horrific fur farms that keep mink and fox in tiny cages. And but again, that one is an agriculture product, so that goes through the Agriculture Committee and Natural Resources, and we've sort of been hitting a wall every single year because they're not going to regulate fur farms in our state. So we're now looking at so we cage and kill animals in Washington State, and then we export the fur out of the country. That's what we do. Usually goes to China, but there's some other places, but 95% goes to China. And then they take that raw fur and then process it into goods, fur coats, whatever, and then ship it back to the United States. And then they sell it as a finished fur product. And so that's what this bill does. It's dealing with finished fur products, fur coats, things that have cloth sewn into a fur. This bill went to a business committee, which is really exciting, because last year the same exact bill was referred to an agriculture and the natural resources committee, which is again this is not a raw product, it's not an agriculture product, this is a finished product. So our big goal this year was to sort of get it into the correct committee, and so this is the first time these legislators have really considered this issue, and there was a really concerted effort by the fur industry to loop in the hunting lobby and the fishing lobby, who we've already been sort of having some, broader culture wars in our state, dealing with hunting and fishing in the commission and in the legislature. And even though this bill has no impact to the ability to hunt, trap, or fish in Washington state, it became this cultural fight that the business committee just was not prepared for. And so again, the bill did not move this year, but we feel that we can do some good, solid education to the committee in the interim, and I feel very optimistic this bill can move forward in the future. So thanks for giving me the 10 minutes floor there, but these are two bills that are really important, and they're going to move, and be encouraged. They just didn't move this year.
All right, thank you, Dan. All right, now is the fun part, because this is how all of you as constituents and Washington residents can take action on these bills and other issues. So the next few slides, I'm going to move through pretty quickly, but it's really basic ways for you to engage, especially with the legislative session, the legislative process. So first things first is understanding how to contact your legislators, or even identify who your legislators are. So if you go to the legislative website, and we'll have that highlighted on the next slide for you of how to find that. And I'm also going to put it in the chat right here. So basically, you're going to go to leg.wa.gov, and on the right-hand side of that main legislative page, you're going to have a few tools and links that you can click through. What you're primarily going to be looking for is the first few sections, and if you look under Find, there is a button that you can press that says Find Your District and Legislators. So you're going to click that, which will take you to the next page, and you're going to see a map up on the website, and that's where you can put in your personal address, and then it will show you who your legislators in your district are. So for me, I am in the 40th district, and it has my 2 listed representatives and my senator, and it also will highlight my congressional district as well if I wanted to comment on any federal issues. So again, in the chat, you can find a link to this page, so any of you can go in and find out who your legislators are and what district you are part of. Then the next thing that you can do, and the next way that you can use the legislative website as a really great tool, is you can track bills throughout the legislative process. So going back to the main legislative website page, the leg.wa.gov, under Find, there is a button that says Bills. So you can click on that, and that will bring you to a page that will allow you to type in any bill number. So any of the bills that we worked on this session, or that we've called out in this webinar, you can type in those bill numbers, and it will pop up a page that will show you where that bill is in the legislative process. So that'll show up on the next slide here, a little bit about what that would look like. So for me, I typed in House Bill 1153, which is the octopus bill. And so now I can see where that bill is at. And then on the right-hand side is another way for you to stay involved with that bill and that issue. So you can click on Get Email Notifications on the right-hand side there, put in your name and email address, and that allows you to get really timely updates on any bill throughout the legislative process. So if I sign up for email alerts on the octopus bill, I'm going to know exactly when that octopus bill is scheduled for a hearing. I'm going to know exactly when it's scheduled for an executive session. I'm going to know exactly when it goes to the floor and what the vote is after it passes the floor. So this is a really great tool. Also, when you get those email notifications, and you know that there's a hearing coming up, there will be another box that'll show up, another button that'll show up on this page that allows you to sign up for testimony for a hearing. So that will pop up anytime a hearing is scheduled for a bill or a. So this is a really great tool that you can use throughout the legislative process. And then I'm going to hand it over to Josh for the next couple of slides to talk you through just some general lobbying tips and some great ways to communicate with your legislators.
Yeah, thanks, Brenna. I'll try to go quickly. There's a nice set of bullet points here. So as much as in an email, you might want to scream and yell at like the agriculture committee members that Dan was talking about who don't like our bills, that generally doesn't work. If you want to do that, you can join Animal Rights Initiative at our street demonstrations. That is a good venue, but I think they're far more responsive if you keep it respectful, especially in your email. So yes, as is, always be respectful. It is very important to identify yourself as a constituent if you are a constituent of a member of a committee, for example. Now, anybody from across the world can sign in to give testimony, to provide written testimony, to register pro or con, and to even use like great action alerts like NARN or Pasado's has, except for like, others might correct me, but it's very, in all of these cases, it's very important for them to hear from the constituents. And that's where we want the emphasis to be. And in fact, when you're contacting legislators to vote in the House or Senate as a whole, unless you have their direct email information already, you have to be a constituent, or you have to be at least a Washingtonian, rather, who has a member of a legislative district. Always refer clearly, which the action alerts that Pasado's and NARN that we share we're very good at. Refer to bills by their name and number so that legislators don't have to, rack their brain. I even personally will like do attachments. I'll just download a copy of the bill and just add them so they can quickly look. State a clear and concise objective. Just get directly. We want this bill does this, and we want this reason. You don't need to go very long, but a couple sentences at most. As it says, explain why the issue is important to you as a constituent. Keep the relationship active. So like you'll see tons of action alerts sent out like in a short period of time. So it's very easy. And that's because of these sessions are often very short. But one thing I would also add to this for the next slide is thank you. I was just gonna say that we at least heard, we had a meeting last year with Representative April Berg, and I actually been wondering this for the few years I've been in legislative advocacy, and she emphasized that actually these mass emails that you all send out with like the same header, like sure you can put your own private sentiments in, but Brett Berg told us that most legislators, they get perked up when they actually see a lot of these bulk emails. So don't think that that's pointless. They actually, at least according to her, those are very helpful for them to be like, oh my God, I think that's what happened with these hunters and fisher people that Dan was talking about, is they all sent these like emails that probably at the top are like, don't take away our ability to hunt and fish or whatever the hell they said. And so they get notice of those things. So we got to do it on our side. Okay. Next one, Brenna, I think I get it. Here's a great example. I love this one. Yeah. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm your constituent in the 21st district to take the prime sponsor of this bill. As a Washington resident, I urge you to support HB 1153. We can prohibit before it starts. A luxury product that's unsustainable. Passing it would ensure octopus farms and their associates do not come to Washington. Thank you for your time. And last thing I'll emphasize is, as animal lovers here, I think it's really great to include, I always do, about the treatment of animals, but a lot of these legislators are, especially Democrats, I would say, personally, are motivated by ecological concerns, which I am as well. A lot of business concerns you could add in for both parties. So sometimes adding that, in my opinion, as a main emphasis or at least a complementary interest is key. Because frankly, having a bunch of animal rights people getting up and talking about how cruel these practices are, which is extremely true, like in testimony, for example, or even in these emails, I don't know if that's always the best move. And that's why you want some diversity in those descriptions. Okay, I'll leave it there because we're getting past time.
Okay, so there are a variety of ways that you can actually take action. We've already talked about how you can contact your legislators, and that's a great way to take action. However, we have tried to make it as easy as possible for you. and put out action alerts for you on a variety of platforms. And I really recommend that you all follow our social medias, because our social media will be the most up-to-date place to find the most the actions that really need actions right at that moment, because this, as you know, this legislation is moving really, really fast. And so the fastest way to see it is on our social media. How you can act on all the bills still at play will be on our social media. There are also a couple trackers that we'll put in the chat that you can track. Pasado's has a tracker and NARN has a tracker. NARN's tracker will have the wildlife stuff. Pasado's will have all the animal stuff aside from wildlife. And so just keep track of those two trackers, because those trackers will also have the actions that you can take on them, and they'll be up to date. And just know that for some of the bills that have already died, there's things that we can still do too. That beaver bill that we were talking about, that could still be pushed back to WDFW and be done in a rulemaking that I talked about. So stay up to date with us, follow our social medias, sign up to receive our newsletters, and you'll see the most up-to-date stuff on some of these bills that have even died. So that's kind of exciting, right? Thanks for putting that in the chat, Brenna. I appreciate it. And some of these actions are 30-second actions, right? That's 30 seconds out of your day. That's pretty cool. And some of them are just a couple minutes. So we're not asking for a lot of your time. And that's kind of the beauty of working with the legislature and working with bills, is that you can really, really quickly do timely and direct calls and letters and everything. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you to all the speakers who presented some really inspiring work that is happening right now. And Maddie on the Pasado's team has been monitoring the Q&A, and I know we just have a couple questions that I want to make sure get answered, and then we will give you all back your evenings. But thank you all so much for coming. Maddie, what do we have in the Q&A?
Our first question was from Barbie, asking what in the pet rent bill serves to incentivize landlords to permit pets?
Oh, that's a good question, Barbie. Nothing incentivizes them in the bill. So, there would still be the ability to collect a deposit. And, if satisfied, they have to return it. And then, we were originally okay with a $30 a month pet rent. It was actually the sponsor that introduced it with prohibition on rent. So we were always expecting to sort of negotiate that number. Seems reasonable, but $30 a month is still $360 a year. So that's a lot of money. But nothing explicitly in the bill would incentivize.
Yeah, and can I add to that, Dan, just by saying that in Washington State, over 60% of our residents are pet owners. So if a landlord decided not to allow pets because a bill like this passed, they will be wiping out 60% of their potential clients. So, the choice seems obvious there, and obviously there's room for compromise too with bills like this, but really, Washington is a very pet friendly state, so landlords will be losing a lot of clientele.
All right. Second question from Chelsea is, what actions can be taken by those of us that live outside of Washington State? I'm in Oregon and have been able to register or submit testimony on some bills, but others seem to require that you have a Washington address. Thank you everyone for your work this session and beyond.
I think any of us could really answer that question, but when a bill is going through the Washington State Legislature, of course, they really want to hear from Washington State residents because it's a lot more powerful for actions to be taken by constituents. However, if you are from Oregon, you can use a lot of, you'll see action that's going out from any of our organizations on like signing in pro for a specific bill. You can do that if you are out of state in most cases. But, you know, again, when it comes to actually like signing up for testimony before a panel, they really appreciate it if you are from Washington State, because then they know that it will be something that will actually impact you. A great question.
I would also suggest in response to that question to get involved in Oregon, because Oregon is going to have the same kind of suite of issues, and explore ways that you can use your voice as a constituent in Oregon as well.
Third question from MK is, have the use of pro versus con sign-ins been utilized as a tactic for any of the bills that struggle to turn out the way we want? That is, have animal rights folks used them, and has the opposition been using it to drown out folks?
We're all like nodding our heads. Yeah, we definitely heavily utilize the ability for the pro-con sign-in for hearing testimony. That's one of like the really great things that actually came out of COVID when a lot of things went virtual. It became a lot more accessible for the general public to get involved with hearings, and that pro-con sign-in list that goes on the legislative record. So it does go before committee members when they are reviewing a bill for a hearing. And I imagine if it's very overwhelming one way or the other, that obviously is something that they will take note of when they are reviewing a bill.
Can I add one thing there? I do think this also just sort of a bit of sort of a sober aspect of this is to go back to Dan's point about how important it is who your gatekeepers are in the committee chairs. I remember in 2022, what was it? 2021, we actually got a public hearing on a fur farm prohibition bill from Representative Chapman, who's the chair, won't be the chair after this session, but is the chair currently of the House Agriculture Committee. And I remember we had something like 9 or 10 to 1 pro, I counted, for that, for banning fur farms. So like it's needed. It's just not, I think, in coupled with a good committee for us, because that particular guy, and I don't want to get too deep, he did not give a whit that there was like 9 or 10 to 1 support. At least we had the hearing, which only about a quarter of bills, according to some things, that might even get a hearing. So I don't want to give him any really credit, but he did do that. But I think that like it really helps if you're for animal bills coupled with the good committee, which I don't think we can overemphasize that one enough based on my few years doing this. Yeah.
And I'll just add, for SJR 8208, we had hundreds of people sign in on both sides. And that was really started by national hunting groups that put out nationwide calls for people to sign in, and you're able to sign in from out of state as in favor of the right to hunt bill. In fact, we were getting pretty roundly beat in the pro versus con column for a while because they got a head start on us. And in that case, I think it was really important that our side showed up, and we didn't get quite even, but we got pretty close on that bill to make it clear, at least to the legislators, that this wasn't an all, happy-go-lucky, just, a vote of support for the traditional way of life and hunting type of bill, but that it would be an ugly fight, and a lot of people cared about it. So I wasn't going to win the day, except if they were thinking, hey, this is an easy one, let's just pass it on and everyone will love me. We made it clear that that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and one more thing, really fast. I think also for people participating in the process, for those of you who want to engage in this process, the pros and cons are a super easy way to do that. these are the 30-second action alerts that we were talking about. And what's amazing about the pro and con thing is how easy it is for each of us to share with other people. So when you see a pro and con thing on social media or from one of our groups, share it with others, because it's a phenomenal ask to ask of other people to take 30 seconds and say, oh, yes, I do support this, or no, I don't support this at all. It's a great way to get involved.
All right, we have one more question from Terry. What is the tribe's reasoning / justification for needing to reduce the wolf population?
You're muted, Claire.
I can only really speculate. I don't know. They've not said what the justification is. So yeah, I hate to put words in their mouth, but I can say what the reasoning would be of people on the lands surrounding the tribes to do that. And that would be, to reduce conflicts with livestock, even though the science shows that killing wolves does not reduce conflicts with livestock, to increase prey ungulate populations. Again, the old thing, we hate having predators kill something that we want to kill, even though the science doesn't show that predator populations are in trouble, or that killing wolves would help, that ungulate populations are in trouble, or that killing wolves would help ungulate populations. So, once you enter the territory of the wolf wars, you lose a lot of logic and sense, and a lot of what people are trying to do doesn't necessarily connect with the goals that they have in mind.
All right, I think that was our last question of the evening. But I do want to point everybody to the chat. There is a lot of links in there that were shared. There's also going to be a follow-up email that will include those action items as well. So if you don't capture everything from the chat, don't worry, there will be an email with all of that included. And this session was recorded as well, which will be shared in that follow-up email. So still plenty of ways to take action. We still have a couple weeks left in the session. Thank you to all of the speakers and the organizations that they represent. I think collectively this group has done a lot of really amazing work for animals, especially this year in the legislative session. So thank you to them, and thank you everybody for attending.